Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. We did start tonight's meeting with an executive session having to do with purchase of property. We have nothing further really to announce on that at this time. And next order of business is a public hearing, so we're going to move right into that. It has to do with an application from National Grid. Ms. Melverhill, would you please read the notice?
Can I hear from here? Sure. Town of Code, public hearing, is hereby notified that public hearing will be conducted by the Board of Selectmen at 7 p.m. Tuesday, December 8th, upon the following petition of National Grid to install and maintain approximately 115 feet of 4-inch LP plastic main from existing 6-inch LP bare steel main from the intersection of Central Street and Railroad Avenue, Norwood, number 244 Central Street. Install approximately 90 feet of 4-inch LP plastic service to serve the commercial space at 244 Central Street, Norwood, extending off the proposed 4-inch LP plastic main extension along which designated route of line your, this is the abutter notice. This meeting will be conducted via hybrid model community room at 137 Manhattan Street. Board of Selectmen, William J. Plasko, Chairman.
Thank you. This evening, before we proceed, was contacted by Mary Mulroney from National Grid. Unfortunately, some scheduling errors occurred, and she ended up having a couple of meetings the same evening. Since we were scheduled to meet next week, I suggested that we would be willing to continue this hearing for 1 week.
So moved.
Second.
Anything on that? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous? Thank you. So next order of business is a show cause hearing at 7:30. We have a little time for that, so we'll start in on our new business. First matter is a proposed new draft of liquor license regulations being put together for us by Mr. Jar. Would you like to lead that discussion, sir?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we've been at this for quite some time, got a lot of excellent feedback from not just board members, but town council, Chief Brooks, and Christina, who handles our license operation as well. So what you have is basically a 4-page document that, for the most part, outlines some clarifications we have with regards to what we want to see. There are a couple in here that sort of reiterate state law, but really, for the most part, these are slightly altered requirements, and hoping that we can pass these as a draft and then discuss the point regards to how we're going to move forward, hopefully with a meeting, with some type of public meeting. I wouldn't call it a public hearing, a public meeting where we can review this and some other matters. Tony was the one who put the bug in my ear about, well, we could do more than just license regulations. We could talk about 2021 outdoor dining so that we can turn this whole discussion into a positive meeting, not just sort of the hammer of, well, these are regulations, regulations, regulations. I thought that was an excellent suggestion, which is the reason why it's in the memo. So all of you I know have given me feedback, so I know you've read them. I don't know if there are any more questions. We can talk about it, so thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Comments, questions? Mr. Maloney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Hajar. It's been a number of iterations, but it's a stronger document for the extra work. So, thank you. Question, Mr. DeLuca, can I direct a couple of questions your way on this?
Sure.
Is that a,
Yeah, the microphone, no.
just? I'll tell you what, David.
Dave, why don't you take my seat? I'll over the computer.
First off, in just a general sense, have you had the opportunity to review these documents?
I have.
Do you have any questions, comments, or concerns about any of the provisions there?
No, I can comment that it's customary, and you'll find from your neighboring towns, to have a set of alcohol rules and regulations. It helps sort of standardize the process of application, of management, and ultimately of discipline if it's called for in the event of a violation of not just your rules and regulations, but of state law. We've tried our best to try to not duplicate state law in these regulations, but to articulate regulations that you would feel to be particularly relevant to the administration of alcohol license here in Norwood. So they may vary to some extent from other towns, but as a general observation, it's not unusual at all for a community to have its own rules and regulations to streamline the administration of licensing in that town.
That's terrific. Thank you very much. A couple of specific things then, and I'll be done. We're talking about some things like specifying a certain level of training. We mentioned TIPS training, and I know that we have sometimes offered that training here in Norwood at the police station for free. Are we on firm legal ground to say you must be trained to successfully complete an alcohol management course within 30 days of employment, and at the minimum, you must be TIP certified?
Yes, that's consistent with state law, and I have every reason to believe that it would be enforced at the Alcohol Beverage Control Commission level.
Okay.
So that if there were some kind of appeal to the ABCC, that should be upheld at the ABCC.
Terrific. We're talking about maintaining records so that if there is an incident that has to be investigated later on, we can request video surveillance tapes that might have been kept and records of sales that might have been used, recorded in a scanner or some other means, whether on-site or off-site. Are we, in your opinion, are we on firm legal ground to have those requirements?
Yes, the maintenance of videotapes and records of sales is something that is, again, enforceable at a local level and with the ABCC.
Very good. Finally, I just think on, we had a couple of things on, it's presumed that presumably afterwards, it's presumed that if somebody left the establishment and they had something in their hand, we presume it has alcohol in it because the people who are inside an establishment are not allowed to leave with alcohol. Are we on firm legal ground to make that a requirement as well?
Right. So you're by way of these regulations creating a presumption that an open container is something that was provided by way of service of the license holder, and I think that presumption can hold through the hearing process unless it's rebutted by some other positive or affirmative evidence.
Okay, very good. That's all I have. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mrs. Donahue?
Thank you, Mr. DeLuca.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In regard to Selectman Maloney's first question, if you go to page 2, section 3A, line 5, must be TIP certified or other equally suitable training. So that takes care of that. And in regard to your last question, it would seem that whether or not it was alcohol or not, if you create the presumption, it could be proved or unproven in a court of law.
Okay.
Right.
It's a
Yeah,
fact.
it's a rebuttable presumption.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Donahue.
Anyone else? Any motions?
There is one grammar error which I would change on page 3. Matt found it for me. 8B, the last sentence there, the word contain should be containing, so we'll fix that. With that, I'm going to move that we approve or at least disperse this draft version to all holders of liquor license and have a public meeting with them to discuss this and other issues that the general manager feels would be appropriate discussions for those with the license for 2021, namely outdoor dining.
Are you talking about a meeting with the board?
Yes, whoever would like
Because
to
you
meet,
mentioned the manager.
I'm sorry, with the board and manager.
Mr. Maloney?
Well, the chief is here. I was wondering if we Just a couple of questions for the chief, if anybody wanted to avail themselves of the chief's wisdom.
Well, I just want to get for the record that, Chief, the version that we have, I believe, was sent to you as well, and that you had a, I would say, significant hand in drafting. You've actually been working with me since September of 2019 to try to get some form of local regs in place. And are you satisfied that these regulations from an enforcement standard, that you are okay with enforcing? Because it is basically up to your department to run with these.
I see no problem with enforcing them, and I think they provide the board with some options that you wouldn't currently have under ABCC regulations or under state law. So I think I think the board will find them helpful.
On that, Mr. Chairman?
This morning.
Just to follow up, Mr. Hajar and others, I did have a chance to talk with the chief privately before the meeting tonight with a couple of specific questions on matters here, and he and I discussed them. I'm satisfied with his answers on it as well, so thank you.
Okay, I just want to understand your motion. Don't have a problem with it, except for understanding it.
Okay.
You want us to-
Basically, I want
You want us to
to,
schedule a hearing before the board?
no, I would say just a public meeting with, at a location to be determined, in which we would take feedback from any liquor license holder that would like to attend the meeting, since we're not approving these as final, to get their feedback. We can accept it or not accept it. I mean, it's up to us, but they may bring something to our attention that we have not thought of, or some issue that they may have that we may feel is worthwhile reviewing. Then after the meeting, we'd bring it back and vote a final.
So a separate special meeting,
Yes,
just with the license holders?
yes.
This morning?
Just on that, Mr. Chairman, I suppose we should distribute these in advance of that, correct?
Yes, I would, my suggestion is that we asked Christina to send, I'll give her an updated draft, and we'll send that out, and she can coordinate a date sometime in January, give them enough time to read it. I would request, Mr. Chairman, that the chief and Attorney DeLuca be present. I'm sure they will probably have, some of them may have their attorney present to ask questions, and I would feel more comfortable that the people that were helped draft these regulations are there to answer questions that they may have.
You know, the other thing too, sorry to interrupt, but you could also invite comment via email or written. People might say, I don't need to go to a public meeting. I like what I see. I did have a question about, Section 8, the third sentence, and,
Sure, the
maybe-
letter could give an email address, right, Mr. Maloney,
Yeah.
and to submit written questions ahead of time if they want, or whatever, sure.
Good idea.
That's
Okay.
excellent.
Okay, so the
So
motion
the
is
motion
to
is to
approve,
distribute and-
approve a draft to be distributed to all license holders, and at a future date to be determined in January to offer those license holders to meet with the board to discuss the same.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
I
Opposed?
abstain.
One abstention. 4-0, one abstention, Mrs. Donahue. All right, thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Good night.
And thank you, Chief, Mr. DeLuca, Attorney DeLuca. Next item on the new business is discussion of the UAV LLC special permit application. At our last meeting, I brought up the subject that there was activity down and a special permit having to do with the property in University Ave, 973 University Ave, that should have significant concern to the town, to the Board of Selectmen, and stated that if it was all right with the board, I'd put together some information for the board to consider whether we wanted to take further action or not. I did that by way of putting together a letter because of the timing. They meet on the 15th, and they would like any comments by this Thursday, so if we're going to have any comments, we need to be moving quickly. So I put all the facts that I thought were pertinent and of concern in the form of this letter. I asked for some assistance from Mr. Halkiotis and Town Council to fill in some blanks and to polish up my letter and to put in references to the sections of the law, the bylaw, whatever so that it could be easily followed and make sense to everyone. I think it's come up to be a good letter that is pretty direct as to our concerns, and was able to get it out to you in advance, and basically open for any questions or comments. But the bottom line is, I think it's important that we take a stand on this, at least as to raise points that we think are of serious nature that should be looked at very carefully by the zoning board, and I think we could do that by way of sending this letter.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I've had the opportunity to review the letter. I think it's quite well done. Went through several drafts, and it was improved each time. So I do want to, I do think it would be a good idea for us to express our opinions on this in the form of that letter. This could be a pretty serious matter here. And to tell you the truth, I have to applaud the ZBA for postponing or for continuing the hearing until the 15th and allowing comment on it, because it's important, and it frankly it could be a real problem for us down the line. So I think I definitely think it's a good idea to send a letter. I also, by the way, we got a letter from Reamer and Bronstein on this.
Yes, we have part of the letter that we would send, assuming approval, does talk also about ongoing activity after special permit has expired and the cease and desist order has been given by the building commissioner. They also have a lot of photos that were handed out to show ongoing activity at that site and violation of those. And we have a letter received just today, this evening, late afternoon, I guess, from the attorneys from MS Walker, the abutting property. And it's pretty lengthy. Haven't even had time to read it carefully because it's so long. But there's two things Mr. Maloney and I were talking just before the meeting that probably, again, because of the shortness of time, to make sure this information is seen by the zoning board, probably forward a copy to them, I think, is a recommendation. And there is some actions in this letter that they're asking the Board of Selectmen to take, and authority under bylaws and other laws. And I think in that instance, we should forward this letter to council, ask him to further review it, and make any recommendations as to what our responsibility is and what appropriate actions might be considered by the board in relations to their, I'll call them demands. So I would, I guess, make a motion to move this forward, that we approve the letter presented for the board's position to be sent to the zoning board tomorrow, so they have it in time, and to forward the letter from MS Walker's attorney to both the zoning board and town council as noted.
Chair, I make that motion for you because as chair, you'd have to step down, right, to make the motion?
No, we don't follow
You
that
don't have to
process,
do that anymore?
but you want to make the motion, that's
Sure.
perfectly fine. Is there a second?
Second.
Hayden, second?
On the motion?
Yes, certainly.
The letter that you've prepared, Mr. Chairman, do you want it to come from the entire board or just from yourself?
No, from the board.
Okay, very good.
As I had mentioned, I had gone to the hearing, I had given some comments as an individual and had said to the board member, the zoning board members, that they probably recognized me as chairman, but I wasn't there as chairman because we hadn't even discussed the matter, we hadn't seen the matter. But now we have, and I did tell the board, though, that I thought that the zoning board, that this would be a matter, this site and activity would be a matter of concern to the board, and the board would probably be reviewing it and may or may not take action. So now I'm asking that we do take action by sending this letter
Are we going to attach these
and attach the photos.
and the letter?
From the Reamer and Bronstein.
Yes, yes. Okay?
Just
Yes.
a question. In reading through the documents, or the letter, Mr. Chairman, as well as the pictures that were sent to us from Joe Collins from Tony's office, I'm really surprised at the amount of activity that has taken place there. Matt,
Sure.
Matt Walsh's role, can someone explain to me what his role is with regards to how we enforce a cease and desist order that was legally given to the applicant, or the owner, I should say?
And clearly ignored. Maybe council could answer that.
Mr. Chairman, in response to Selectman Hajar's question, the building inspector is the zoning enforcement officer in the town of Norwood. When he was made aware back in March of 2020 that there was excavation continuing here and that possibly there was encroachment in that activity upon the property of M.S. Walker, caused him to go back and review the records of this activity, and indeed he found that the permit that had previously been issued had expired. And there and then he issued the cease and desist and required that if there was going to be any further activity, that it be only pursuant to a new permit. And it was at that time that there was then the application for a new earth removal permit. It's been in process since that time. So I think that the building inspector acted timely on a request for enforcement, and he did just that. He issued the cease and desist.
I think part of the question might be that since he has issued that, much of this work that Mr. Mizuko just showed some photos of is ongoing. And as recent as November 25th, I was standing there watching this operation go on.
Right.
So they have, in my terms, they have violated that cease and desist. Is there any further action
Well-
he or the board could take, and what would that be?
Yeah.
In what form would that be?
Well, typically, if there is a violation of a cease and desist, there are two things. There are possible criminal penalties. There are fines and enforcement under Section 21D, where someone could be written a ticket for violation. We have that option. Or possible court injunction if that becomes necessary. But I understand that there was some activity and there seems to be some ambiguity as to under what authority that was continuing. There was some representation, at least, and to the extent it's true or not, but that there was some activity pursuant to a consent decree that was also effective on this property. So
Yeah, but
without more, it's impossible to know.
The work that we're talking about was way on the other side of the property.
I understand that now.
Okay, so anyhow, I think in part, the action that MS Walker's asking us to take will probably have to be considered by council and the board as to how we respond.
Right, so if I can just follow up, I know Helen wants to ask questions too, but I know government moved slowly, but I'm also concerned that he's staying those one or two steps ahead of us, council, that by the time we get to where we think we need to be, he will have completed everything that he has wanted to do without the necessary permits in place, because that's what he wants to do, or because he thinks he has a right to do it, whatever the reason. So if we've known about the ongoing work or newly discovered ongoing work in violation of anything, and there's already an existing cease and desist, I would ask the question, why aren't we moving quicker on the next step of enforcement to prevent him from just doing whatever he wants?
Well, I can't answer that directly, except to say that the zoning enforcement officer has exclusive jurisdiction over that. As much as you or I might, have a different opinion, I still would need to have the zoning enforcement officer review and determine within his discretion whether or not it's an action that he feels is reasonable to take. As I said, the cease and desist required that there be application for a special permit, and there was that. Now, as to the continuing activity there, I would suggest that the zoning enforcement officer would need to come to a conclusion.
So
Well,
is that a next, or at least another or different step that we should be consulting, or someone should be talking to Matt Walsh to validate either ongoing activities after the fact, or whether the cease and desist is now agreed to be in place, waiting for whatever decision the ZBA is going to make? I don't know if that's something that,
Look, there's certainly every opportunity to consult with Matt and find out what his view of it is.
I
Sure.
think that'd be kind of follow-up from this. The activity has ceased at the moment. In fact, the equipment was removed last Thursday and Friday before the zoning board was going down for a site visit. That doesn't mean it can't come back, or some other activity, like they might stop doing grinding and crushing of rock, but they might still come on and remove what's already there, which in itself would be a violation, because a violation that cease and desist is to do nothing on the site except for to comply with the EPA order, as I understand it. So you just have to watch and see if it starts up again, I think, and then talk to Mr. Walsh about it if it does. Mrs. Donahue?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What was the date that the original permit expired?
I believe it was mid-January of 2015. It was a
So-
2-year permit, right?
Yes.
And it was issued in January of 2013.
So the permit that they have been using now,
They are not using a permit.
that, not at the moment, but up until recently, that expired in January of 2015?
It was a 2-year permit.
So the way that things used to work in the building department was that when a permit expired, the building inspector immediately went and made the permit-holding person aware of it. And if they didn't get another permit, then the building inspector immediately took the person, the entity, the business entity, to court. And in most cases, at court, daily fines were imposed on the violator. In those days, it could have been $50 or $300 a day. But, so we're saying that what should have really happened here, if this was done properly by the building department, was that we should have been getting fines. We should have stopped them, and we should have been getting fines. So I would say that the whole thing is a terrible fault, and it's a disgrace to the town.
Yeah, I did discuss that briefly with Mr. Mizuko, actually just this afternoon, that we had to have some kind of tickler system, some kind of way of recording these type of decisions and making sure that there was some kind of follow-up on them, yes.
It's the duty of the department head to take care of it. And a cease and desist now could still be enforced immediately.
Okay, so before we get too far lost, can I go back to the motion? And then we can have discussion on any of these other somewhat related items. If there's more discussion desired by the board. Anything on the specific motion, which was, or did I already take that vote? I don't think I did.
I don't think we did.
Which is to send those letters to the zoning board, as, and along with the photos that we have available on the ongoing activity. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous. All right, I didn't mean to cut it short, but I didn't want to get lost either. Anything else at this time? I think we know we have some follow-up on it, but I don't know that there's any more this evening.
I have a question, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, please.
Where can I get one of those nifty face masks that you're all wearing tonight?
Well, do you have $5? Oh, no, I think Mr. Mizuko will be able to get you.
I'd like to get one of those. They're really
It
terrific.
says from Norwood Printing. It says call Norwood Printing on it.
I will do that. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. I'm afraid I don't have a clock. What time is it?
Time for the 7:30 hearing.
7:33. That means we're time for a show cause hearing, and it was continued, so there's no public notice we need to read. This has to do with the license for Boncaldo, 1381 Boston Providence Turnpike. This was to follow up on a show cause hearing for failure to use the license as the establishment is closed. We have received a letter noting that they're in the process of transferring that license and asking that they be granted an additional 60 days to prepare the application and get everything to us for our consideration of a transfer. So if it meets with the board's approval, accept the motion to continue the hearing for 60 days.
So move.
Is there a second? Second? Anything further on it? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous. All right, so the next business tonight, main business that we have appointments for is a public hearing having to do with the allocation of our tax levy, setting the tax rate. We have a few minutes before that occurs, so we'll go down our new business list. 2021 liquor licenses for approval, licenses for package store, AA and B, and WMV restaurants and holders and clubs for the year 2020 signatures. Is that supposed to be 2021? And have it digitally scanned. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Abstain?
One abstention. Mrs. Donahue abstains. Next item, 2021 licenses, review and approval of the board of following licenses for signatures to be digitally scanned, and it's all the other licenses that we issue at this time of year. Automatic amusement devices, class 1, 2, and 3 motor licenses, common vicular and holder, jukebox licenses for weekdays, limousine licenses, lodging licenses, music entertainment for weekdays and Sundays, taxi cab licenses, 24-hour permit opening, and additional hour permit.
Motion to approve?
All in favor? Opposed? Unanimous. It's also listed here for a discussion of waiver of fees. What was that exactly? Was that the specific ones from Grassroots and the Norwood Theater
Motion to approve.
to waive entire,
Right.
What fees are we?
Whoa.
their license fees, their liquor fees, alcohol fees? They have both pointed out that the situations beyond their control, one being specifically COVID, and then the Grassroots also the shutdown of the Commerce Center properties down there, that they can't use their licenses, that they are temporarily on hold, they can't make any kind of revenue back. So could they have a waiver of the licenses at least until some time that they could be reopened, perhaps prorated? Mr. Hajar?
My concern is the slippery slope that we're going down about either reducing or eliminating fees. I completely understand about the COVID, and for that, we've done that for others, including rent.
We already cut it in half, right?
Yes. My concern is, we seem to be, or I think we need to distinguish between COVID-related issues and non-COVID-related issues. This is a dispute or an issue between the landlord and the tenant, basically. They can't operate because the landlord has failed to comply with certain code issues. And now the town of Norwood's going to step in the middle and say, okay, well, we're going to enter this dispute by saying we're going to relieve certain fees because of that. Is that I'm all for reducing, if there are tenants in that building or any one of the buildings that can't operate because of COVID-related nature, or they can't have that many people in there, and so they're closed down, whatever it is, that's fine. But if we're specifically talking about people who are displaced because the owner of the building is not complying with code, I'm not sure how the town is now going to get into that dispute, without saying we're going to get into any dispute in the future between tenants and landlords. And that's what this amounts to, in my opinion.
I added the fact that they're closed, and I think that was part of their concern. But the bottom line fact is, to date, through this past year, and at the moment, they, like the theater, are closed because of the regulations and COVID.
Right, but there were, and if that's true too, then I don't have a problem with it, but there are many businesses down there that were operating until recently and have been displaced. And are we then going to step in if they come forward and say, well, the owner didn't do their job with providing a safe work environment, a place to do business, so I want relief? Or should they really be going after the landlord for running a building that shouldn't have been run the way it was run? If it's COVID-related, I'm for it. If this gentleman, the grassroots, is asking for relief because of COVID, he couldn't run his business and others are down there, then yes, we should treat them like we have done others and help reduce that fee. But if some of those folks from buildings that were evacuated because of the fire and now they won't let them back in because the building commissioner has closed down not just some of those buildings, but some others, and that's the cause of it, I have an issue with that myself.
Yeah, I might have messed up the discussion, but the request is from those two license holders because they are entertainment type of venues that have been closed because of the COVID and are still closed. Mr. Maloney?
Just, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I agree with you on this, Mr. Chairman. One of the things that we did get from the governor today, we have been rolled back, or pushed back, is that the term, to Phase 3, Step 1, which requires that the closing of indoor theaters and performance venues and a few smaller indoor recreation businesses like roller rinks and trampoline parks. So in the case of the grassroots, now they have the beer and wine license, and what other license do they have? Music and entertainment license, okay. Neither of which they can use at the moment. Yeah, okay, and the same goes for Norwood Theater. Are there any other venues like this in town?
Well, the Magic Room, but they haven't opened yet.
Magic Room hasn't opened yet. So even in the case of grassroots, because Mr. Hajar makes a distinction between the two causes, and he's right, but in the case of the grassroots, I think they've been closed anyway.
They have. They were
At least
closed before any of that.
They might have been, what's the word, putting it out over Facebook, putting performances on Facebook, but not live performances. But in any event, they can't do anything now, and it's because of the governor's order. So I think we have sufficient justification there from Beacon Hill to go ahead and waive these fees for both of those venues.
That's motion.
I think thank you, Mr. Chairman, to your point, Mr. Jar, I'm not sure what kind of relief we could offer to the other businesses down there. I don't know if you had any thoughts on that.
That's a good question. What other licenses are down, junk dealers or something?
The junk dealer licenses, yeah.
Yeah.
They don't pay, they pay all their bills.
But
They can more easily relocate.
I'm sorry?
They can more easily relocate the businesses.
Okay.
But the theater and grassroots can't open even if they're.
Venues, yeah, okay, all right. So,
That's cool. Good.
I understand.
do you want a motion?
I
to-
do.
You
So,
have a motion. I
Yep.
made a motion to
Oh, okay.
approve.
Oh, you did?
did you get a
Yes.
second?
Is there a second?
Second?
Is there anything further? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous. Keep me on time here, someone, when it's 3 more minutes. Thank you. Darrell Hanson Broadband Division, Norwood Light Broadband, submitting accordance with Mass Cable Regulations, copy of the 2019 annual state license fees paid to and filed with the Massachusetts Department of Telecommunications and Cable, and also billing practices notice, rate cards, sample work order, and sample subscription bill.
Information file.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous. Aaron and Martha Greenfield, 206 Rock Street, submitting an application to place menorah display on the town common for 8 days of Hanukkah, December 10th through December 18th.
Motion to approve.
All in
Second.
favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous. Distribution of proposed updates to the Hackney regulations. We've got A, B, C, and D, license application, vehicle license application, driver's license application, and a set of rules and regulations. Mr. Hajar, you've worked on this and presented this for us this evening?
Yes, it's just really updated documents from what we have today, based on discussions, again, with Christina, Town Council, and Chief Brooks, in trying to organize the business, vehicle, and driver applications a little more formally and probably more efficiently than what they are today. So I know this will be on the agenda in the future for discussion, but just want to get you the document so you can get feedback. We do have now interest from 3 different cab companies that are interested, so the sooner we can get this done, the better. And if we can get 1 out of those 3, that would be great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So information to file at this time and study this information we've been given. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Mrs. Donahue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On number 7, on the lighting of the menorah,
Yes.
there is a little ceremony planned at 7 o'clock on the 10th, and everyone's welcome to come by.
Okay, that's the public, not just the
Right.
board you're talking to.
Right, on the common.
Thank you for pointing that out. So, the hour has arrived. We have a tax hearing with a meeting with our Board of Assessors to discuss setting of this year's tax rate. We've got a lot of information. I see Mr. McDonough with us, Mr. Thornton with us, and Timmy or Bobby, who's ever going to start this discussion, would you like to take it from here?
Sure, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me fine?
Yes, we do.
Okay. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Mr. Mizuko. This is Mulvihill and this is Joswick. I'd like to introduce the board, my board that's here, Mr. Robert Thornton. I know you're all very familiar with Bob. Here in the office with me is also Mr. Jim Grover from the board. So the board is here this evening to give you options regarding the fiscal year 21 tax rate. As in past years, all of our commercial, residential, as well as our personal properties have been reviewed per outside vendors for submittal to the Massachusetts Department of Revenue. The packet that you've received has detailed information to support the new assessed values. We were able to increase our new growth to 1.1 million, which is slightly higher than we expected. It's really as a result of several factors, beginning with the 100% completion and full taxation of the Avalon Bay Apartments, the completion final phase of condominiums at Endicott Woods, beginning of construction at the Manhattan Hill condominiums, and the new Washington Street condos, as well as new single-family construction and building permits that were collected over the period of 1 year. By and large, most residential properties saw an increase in assessed values. As I'm sure everybody's pretty well aware, just looking around in town, you'll be able to see property values are selling for very high prices, sometimes much more than the asking price. Larger apartment complexes continue to see increased values. Commercial property values were reviewed and adjusted on a case-by-case basis, which actually resulted in few changes in the commercial values. It's important to note that the new assessed values are based upon sales of properties that sold in 2019, as well as supporting evidence from income and expense data and new growth in our personal properties. The accompanying PowerPoint presentation, which was so helpfully put together by Mr. Thornton and Mr. Grover, will explain in more depth how we got here this evening, and how the board may want to proceed. So the board has prepared the PowerPoint presentation to highlight and summarize and support the hundreds of figures that are in the package. So we'll start with the PowerPoint, which is basically just an announcement of the hearing this evening. On the next page, which is page 2 that you have, the key components of the tax bills. This is how we arrive at the tax rate. We take the total tax levy divided by the property values, which comes to our tax rate. On the next page, if we had a single tax rate without a shift, all property values being taxed at the same, you'd take the levy divided by the real estate value, divided by 1,000, we'd have a single tax rate of $15.02 for both residential and commercial. The next slide shows the historical tax levy analysis, and we'll go right to that. For the last several years, you'll see what the beginning levy is, levy limit. We have, every year we go up 2.5% increase, property 2.5%. And then we also add in our new growth. Last year was a large number, and I think the board might remember, as a result of us going door to door on the 10-year evaluation of all properties. So this year, our numbers are actually higher than historical as far as growth on the levy. Mr. Thornton has in the past shown slides that where average is about $850 per year. We were lucky a little bit, like I say, this year because of the Avalon Bay and the other condominiums. So you have a subtotal of the levy limit plus the 2.5% plus the growth. And then you also have the operation override levy. That comes out to the subtotal of what our new levy limit, minus the including the debt exclusion. And that comes to the end of the year levy limit. On the next slide, you'll see total tax levy history for the last several years. Pretty much average for the first 5 years, you know, from 4.0 to 3.7, 4.2, 4.0, 3.2. The large jump in 2020, of course, was the result of the override that was passed by the voters. This year, we're kind of back down to where we have been historically for fiscal year 2021 with a 4.6% tax levy. The next slide, why the tax levy went up. 4.6%, as you said, as I stated, we started with the actual levy from last year, the 2.5% increase, approximately 1.3% on the new growth, and then we're using unused levy from prior years, which we're allowed to use. So the actual levy is that figure of $88,152,761, which is a 4.6% impact, and more in line with what we have seen historically. The next slide shows you that we'll explain the historical unused tax levy. And if we go to the next slide, you'll see that most years we don't usually leave much on the table as far as the unused tax levy, going back to 2016 with the 72,000. Then we've used most of our tax levy up until the last couple of years. And again, that 2020 year was sort of an anomaly as we had that huge increase because we picked up a lot of new growth on properties that hadn't been seen in 10 years. And as the state mandates, you must review every property, commercial, residential, every 10 years to make sure that our information is correct and matches. So this year, we're leaving a little bit of unused levy of 140,000. I think that's been fiscally prudent, that there always is a little buffer zone, but we are using up a lot of the levy from last year to offset the tax rate. On the next slide, historical real estate values analysis. And we'll go to the next slide, which is a steady growth in both residential and commercial. Real estate values have been increasing basically every year, and that's just given the market. If you look over, as I mentioned earlier, properties are selling at historically high prices, and we've seen steady growth in the residential over these years. This year at 2.9% from value with an increase. On the next slide, it basically just shows where the residential real estate value has been increasing. From 2016, you've seen a steady increase all the way up through this year, including a 4% increase in the value of the residential real estate. On the next slide, you'll see the commercial real estate values have been relatively flat. And that's a combination of the state not reviewing commercial values as stringently as they do on residential. They historically did a 3-year analysis of every town. For certification, they've expanded that to 5 years. It's much easier to get data on residential properties within a year-to-year basis, whereas commercial properties don't transfer or sell as rapidly as residential properties. So you can see that the commercial real estate values have pretty much stayed somewhat steady over the last few years anyways, and from last year to this year, just a slight increase. On the next slide, we'll see the average single-family home value increasing, obviously, as the market has dictated. Back in 2016, it was up 5%. Again, in 2017, 5%, 4% the following year, 4% the following year, 6% in 2020, and so far we've seen a 2%. So I say I'd be curious to see where those numbers land next year, based upon everything that's happening with the market and where properties are selling above asking price. But it's been a steady increase, as you can see. Next slide is a historical real estate new growth analysis. And if we go to the next page, we have to every year submit to the Department of Revenue our new growth. And they're pretty particular about looking at all of your growth. This year in particular, as I said, Avalon Bay last year was only at approximately 20% complete. They became 100% taxable this year. That was a big increase from an assessment of 10 million last year to almost 45 million this year. Then you can add in the condos at Endicott, new family construction, single family construction. Most of this is based upon permits that are taken out during the year, reviewed. And when I say permits, if somebody puts in a new shed or somebody puts in a new in-ground pool, that's considered new growth. So the Department of Revenue really checks and balances to make sure whatever you're submitting is verifiable. And this year they worked hand in hand to make sure that our numbers were correct and supportable. And they approved it just last week. On the next slide, we're basically just doing a historical real estate rates analysis. And if you go to the next page, it shows where our rates have been, as a result of the split rates. Pretty much steady on the residential values. They haven't really jumped off of, the low of 1089 up to this year's value of 1115. The board has always tried to keep an even balance between residential and commercial, not trying to overburden the commercial side of it, but also keeping in mind the taxpayers, the residential taxpayers need as much help as everybody else, especially in this economy. The next slide is just basically talking about the shift analysis. And if we go to the next page, the tax rate shift or tip factor towards commercial industrial taxpayers is a result of Chapter 40, Section 56. And what it does is it reduces the average annual increase to residential taxpayers. And as such, the shift goes towards commercial to help reduce the burden on residential. Next slide, which is 21, is basically just reiterating what that Chapter 40, Section 56 says about the percentages of total local tax levy for property. The selectmen shall annually first determine the percentages of the local tax levy to be borne by each class of real property as defined in Section 2A of Chapter 59. In determining such percentages, the selectmen shall first adopt a residential factor. Said factor shall be an amount not less than the minimum residential factor determined by the Commissioner of Revenue in accordance with the provisions of Section 1A of Chapter 58. Prior to the adoption of such percentages, the selectmen shall conduct a public hearing on the question of their adoption. At such hearing, the Board of Assessors, Mr. Grover, Mr. Thornton, and myself, shall provide all information and data relevant to making such determination and the fiscal effect of the available alternatives. The Commissioner of Revenue shall not approve the tax rate of a town until the selectmen have held such a public hearing and until the town has adopted the percentages of the local tax levy to be borne by each class of real and personal property. On the next slide, you'll see the history of the shift going back to 2014. The shift has increased every year as property values have changed every year. And the board, your board, has tried to balance that shift, keeping that in mind of trying to do the best for the taxpayers, both residential and commercial. This year, our levy, our shift percentage could go up to 75%. But we have given you some options of how you may want to proceed from here. If we go to the next slide, again, just where historically where the tip factor has come into play, going back to 2010, it has become increasing that the shift has gone a little bit higher. But again, just reiterating what the board has always, your board has always taken into consideration, taxpayers, residential and commercial. And as I said, this year, the tip factor could go as high as 1.75. The next slide will show the impact of tipping, the tax rate on a single-family residence in fiscal year 2021. These are the what-if scenarios. If the board chose to keep with the 1.68, it would equate to a tax rate for residential of $11.50 for an average tax bill of $56.45 compared to last year's average tax bill of $53.67, which would be a $278 increase or 5.2%. If we go to the next slide, which is the impact on residential if we keep the tip at 68%. Again, that just shows you what it would be, the 278 and the 5.2%, if the board chose to keep it at the 68% that they did last year. The next slide would show if your board chose to go with a 69% tip. Again, the increase in dollar amount is $254. Percentage change is 4.7. The next slide is if the board chose to go to a 70%. Again, the dollar increase is a little bit lower. Percentage change goes to 4.3, but the impact dollar-wise is $229 from the prior year. The next slide is basically the impact of tipping the tax rate on the commercial and industrial. So we want to give you all pretty much the big picture of what happens to both the residential and the commercial. So the next slide shows if you kept that 1.68%, the tax rate for commercial would be 25.23. The average increase, approximately $861, with a 1.7% increase. So it is lower than what the residential shift would be. The next slide will show you the impact across the board, basically what I just said. The dollar change from fiscal year tax 20 to fiscal year 21 tax, $861 with a 1.7%. The next slide shows you a similar comparison at 69%. So the dollar amount goes up a little bit more as far as the dollar change, but the percentage starts to come more in line with what the shift would be for residential. And the next slide is what the impact would be at 70%. Again, just trying to give the board the various options of what the impact would be on commercial versus residential. The dollar change would be a little bit higher at $1,491. Percentage change would be a little bit higher at 2.9%. Again, the next sheet is really just putting both of all that information side by side so that the board can look at if what they kept it at 1.68, which was last year. Then going down, you'll see that the numbers start to come together at the 1.71 shift with a increase for the residential at 3.7. And then you go over to the commercial side and you see a 3.5%. That's really that jumps out at you that's where the board would be keeping parity, I guess would be a description. I'll ask Mr. Thornton maybe to add in on it, but the increase goes up on the residential about $200 and the increase on commercial $1,806. And as I said to, I had a meeting this afternoon with Mr. Hajar, and basically what I kind of said and explained was the residential values have gone up tremendously. The commercial values that we've seen have pretty much stayed the same. They haven't had that huge jump. So to try and be in parity, that seems like an option that the board would want to consider. But again, the decision is up to the board. Our job as the assessors is to give you the options and let you go forward. And I'll just ask if Mr. Thornton has, since he spent so much time with me putting this together, if he has some comments he'd like to add, if that's all right, Mr. Chairman?
Absolutely, certainly. Mr. Thornton, anything to add, sir?
John, you are muted.
You're muted, Mr. Thornton. There you go.
It should have happened more often in my career. It's a good thing, but thank you for having us, and I think Tim did a great job. The only thing I would say is that just pulling myself back, for somebody that looked at this for the better part of 4 decades, the numbers to me, it's exciting to see that the values from a total perspective are very consistent, and that's kind of what you want. That's what anybody would want. Looking at the total values, the increases have been steady, close to 4% every year, no different this year, a little bit less, but very constant. Residential, same thing. The numbers have been, on average about 6%. This year, 4%, but, and I know Mr. McDonough mentioned this, but I think it bears repeating, is that the interesting thing to me is that, and people kind of forget this sometimes, the values that we're looking at now, based on 1/1/2019, right? So, I think you had to be living under a rock to not see what's going on with the values, especially residential this year. They're going crazy, and combination of low interest rates and not a lot of inventory. But as Tim said, the numbers next year should be off the charts. So it seems low that the residential values are only up like 4%, but that's because we're doing a trailing analysis back to 2019. So, looking at everything, and then finally the levy, as Mr. McDonough pointed out, you had an anomaly last year, clearly, that people are aware of with the override. But if you pull that out and you go back to slide 6, I think it was, and slide 7, you basically see that the levy in this town has been very consistent. Where the percentages are, very constant, and that's what you want. And to Mr. McDonough's final point about the final page of this analysis on, I think it's 33, page 30, slide 33, is basically this, that the selectmen have a decision here, and clearly the tipping factor has been less than what it could have been from a maximum standpoint allowed by law in this town. So it's not like you have been, really ratcheting up the hammer towards commercial industrial at all. But you're right now you're at 68%. You're allowed to go up to 75%. And the only thing I think we were trying to show you is that it is your decision. We were just trying to highlight where you are now in green at 68%. You could go to 75, and if you were to go somewhere in the middle, your choice, and say, for example, at 1.71, that would be the point where the percentage increases to residential and to commercial would be at a tipping point that is close. So that's all, I wanted to add to. Tim did a great job, and I appreciate the time.
Thank you very much. Thank you for all the information and the presentation. Before I open it to the board, I have one question that has been stumping me this afternoon as I reviewed these again. In the past, on the commercial property value, for some reason we decided that there's such a big discrepancy from the low commercial properties to the high value commercial properties, that for some reason we chose to use $1 million. This year you're using $2,100,000 as an average. Where did we decide we were too low? Because at the same time we're saying on the valuations, residential's gone up quite a bit, but commercial stayed relatively flat. So why that $1 million increase?
I'm going to let Mr. Thornton, if he wants to jump in on that. I believe we took the total number of properties divided by the commercial value. Is that right, Bob? Or?
Right. I'm not sure, Mr. Chairman, Plasko, what $1 million you're referring to, but essentially those, if you go back to last year's PowerPoint, I do not have it in front of me, but from memory, you should see that there's been very little movement here. The average commercial value last year was about 2 million and change. This year it's 2,000,001. So that has not shifted markedly at all. The average you see on this slide here is what slide are we on now, please? The one that shows the 68%?
Yes.
Yes.
Is that your question, Mr. Chairman? Yeah.
Yes.
So I think if you go on the DOR website for the on Gateway and you look at the tax rate recap, you're going to see the valuation numbers here that come in for commercial, and you're going to see total commercial and industrial value of $1.3 billion, and there's roughly 645 parcels. So the average comes out to 2.1 million. And if you were to go, and Tim, Is that the LA 4 or 7? It escapes me.
It would be on the LA 4, yep.
LA, again, not to bore you all with these abbreviations, but it's the local assessment LA 4 form. It has every component of real estate in the community, from single family to 2 families to 3 to commercial to industrial, et cetera. And it gives total values. So if you were to take this data, Mr. Chairman, you would see that this year, 2021, it's coming up to $2.1 million, which is, we try to show it in red, how that was derived. If you were to go to the same LA4 form for last year, FY20, and/or the same PowerPoint that we used last year, you're going to see the same approximate number. It was slightly south of 2.1 million.
Okay, I probably didn't pick up on that last year, because previous years, we, for whatever reason, were using 1 million, but this is well explained. Thank you. Any other questions,
Okay.
Mrs. Donahue?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. McDonough, Mr. Thornton, and Mr. Grover, thank you so much for this information. The information that we got in our packages and this slide presentation, this is difficult stuff to understand, and you have made it possible to understand, and that's such a help to all of us. Could we please go back to slide, I think it's page 18. Would that be slide 18? It says tax rates, residential versus commercial. Residential, but on.
Yes, it is slide 18, Mrs. Donahue.
Alrighty, so on that page, it clearly shows the years 2016 to 2020 and the difference between the tax rates. So the residential is pretty steady, as you said, and it's within $1 practically for all of those years. But you see that the commercial has gone up so high. And in addition to the tax rate going up high, the town of Norwood water bills have gone up high, the town of Norwood electrical bills have gone up high, and the residential values have increased, but the commercial values have stayed pretty much stable. And we have this hard year behind us, hopefully, 2020, with the virus and its hard economic impacts. We have businesses going, small businesses. Someplace there was a statistic that 20% of small restaurants will be closing and stuff like that. So over the weekend, I thought that I would, that the idea of the 68 was a good idea, because it would help out a little bit the commercial entities this year. And then it was brought up after Mr. Hajar talked to Mr. McDonough about making it even with the 71. But I still think that I'd like to stick with the 68 and just try and this year, since we've had all of these, we need to have jobs for people. People need jobs, and in order to have jobs, we have to have commercial businesses, and maybe this is the year that we have to give them a little break.
Thank you. Other comments, questions for the assessors, or comments on our job of setting the tax rate? Mr. Maloney?
Just a couple of things. Mr. Thornton, probably a question for you. Can you just follow up with Mr. McDonough a little bit about unused tax levy? We are not obliged to use it, isn't that correct? Unused tax levy, should we look at it as a savings plan, or is it a potential to lower the rate for residential and commercial property holders, or both?
Mr. Maloney, yes, I think, you probably would recall, this came up in discussion over the past, not so much when I had the pleasure of working in there, but kind of afterwards, when, there was a lot of thought and effort that went into looking at override information, and you and I have had a bunch of discussions on it, and I'll just say that the general manager did a great job of breaking this stuff out for the people in the town, and a lot of detail. One of the things that Mr. Mizuko focused on, was this, a couple of things, actually, that jumped out at me, that we never had the pleasure of having the benefit or the luxury, I guess you'd say, of having these things available during my tenure there, because things were tight. And they are unused tax levy. The other one that comes to my mind, and Mr. McDonald will know this, the overlay surplus. So these are both concepts that, Mr. Mizuko is pointing out. Those two, along with the popular item of free cash, and reserves, it seemed like we were always, trying to keep things, stable, and to not have a ton of money in the bank, but then cutting programs, So there was always a balance there. And so to answer your question, Mr. Maloney, the unused levy was something that we never really had in my many years there, because we were always playing things so close. And frankly, we never had a lot of reductions in staffing or cutbacks because of that. But as Mr. Mizuko pointed out, and I followed it closely, it's a sign to bond rating agencies and the like, that if you have reserves in the bank that are growing and not decimated, and they're at healthy levels, then your bond rating is going to be better, and that's a great thing to aspire to. But we, again, not to be redundant, but we never had that luxury, and so you notice in this slide here that those numbers have crept up. And I think it was a strategy, and it culminated in 2020. It's no accident in my mind that the high watermark there in 2020 of 899,000 was coincidental with the override. But no, it's something that you don't have to use the total levy, Mr. Maloney, to answer your question directly. We always found ourselves doing so pretty closely. But it's nice that you don't, in case there might be any unforeseen emergencies in the future. And it's also a cushion. It's another form of savings. So, again, Mr. Mizuko mentioned that in the last couple of years. And this year here, the number dipped down to 140. But again, I pull myself away from this graph and look at the percentage increases. If you take away the aberration from last year of 11.9%, I think it was, 11.9% for the override, every year it's like 4%. And the reason for that, the reason why it's not just 2.5%, is because of new growth. So things have been very constant. You don't have to use all the levy capacity you have, Mr. Maloney. We used to. You've gotten away from that, which is a positive thing. And I'm tipping my cap to you all for doing that.
Thank you, Mr. Thornton. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Lane.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you so much for the presentation. I thought it was excellent. I just had a question, probably on top of Mr. Maloney's question. I understand that there's a backlog of abatement requests, and I'm just wondering how that might factor into this outlook into the future, and if the unused tax levy is some sort of cushion for that, potentially.
Mr. Chairman, I can respond, Mr. Lane, to that particular question. So we do have a large number in our overlay account. However, our large number is set aside for outstanding cases. This year, due to COVID, the appellate tax board basically has been shut down since March. They are not hearing any cases. They're basically been non-existent as far as trying to resolve cases. They've pretty much put the onus back on the individual towns and the taxpayers that have filed for abatement and said kind of work it out. But even filing deadlines and paperwork they're not in the appellate tax board pretty much. So we had prior to this year's tax filings, we had settled, we were down to about 30 cases. One particular case, actually 10 cases, involves one particular taxpayer that we've been trying to settle, and they're looking for an astronomical number as far as my board is concerned and our counsel on it. So there are approximately 30 outstanding cases prior to whatever was filed this year. Those cases that have been filed are trickling in because of the backlog. So we have money to settle those cases. Basically, the DOR requires you to have a set amount of money in your overlay to cover any potential settlements that may be coming down. Mr. Thornton is a great historian on the history of unused levy. I think he has told me that there was only once that they actually, the Board of Assessors turned money back out of that account in his years where there was a surplus. And I don't believe we're going to have a surplus, especially with oncoming cases for next year. But the reason that overlay account looks high on the face of it, but when you factor in the 30 outstanding cases, and some of them are large amounts that potential settlements, that'll dwindle down as well as factoring in exemptions. And the board is also, I know, looking at senior exemptions and increasing exemptions for veterans. So that would all come out of that overlay account. But that really wouldn't affect the unused levy. And I think Mr. Thornton would concur with that. You know, they're two different avenues.
Great, thank you, I appreciate that.
Anything, Mr. Hajar?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I, too, want to thank the three of you for putting in the extraordinary time to put together this presentation and actually working throughout the year to make sure we have what we need from tax records and purposes to ensure that we're getting what we need for tax revenue and tax information. That's great. I do want to reiterate the unused tax levy, because I want to make sure that the average person out there knows that if we didn't have it, your taxes would even go up even more. And so it's not just a cushion, it's actual tax savings that we've been able to generate by not spending everything that we could. Correct. Basically, and by not spending everything that we could, we developed this cushion, which is actually saving money on both commercial and residential. It doesn't matter what the rate we pick tonight, we're saving money by not spending up to our tax levy capacity, and that's a good thing. The second is I also want to compliment the new growth. I know people are surprised at the 1.108 for fiscal year 21. I think it shows, and you can tell by the building permits over the past couple of years that have skyrocketed in this town, is that Norwood is a very good place to do business. And people are, whether it's people fixing up their homes, small jobs in commercial or larger jobs, we are very busy. And that's a good thing. So I like to think that even this coming year so far with what we've seen, that number for new growth is going to stay healthy, and we need that to help us, so that is good news. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Anything on our actual business at hand, setting a rate? Any recommendation? Mr. Hajar?
I am going to motion that we select 1.71.
1.71 Schiff.
Yes,
Is there a second to that?
Second.
Mr. Lane seconds that.
on the motion,
Yes,
Mr. Chairman.
please.
So I am very cognizant of the issue regarding commercial, and Mr. Donahue makes an excellent point regarding over the years what's occurred. My reluctance to keeping it at 1.68 is I think both sides are harmed this year because of COVID. I don't want to pick the sides that say residential are hurting worse than commercial, or commercial is hurting worse than residential. I think those that are trying to employ people are having a tough time, and those that are trying to be employed are having a tough time. So, in my mind, fairness is everybody gets about the same percent increase, and that's the number that 1.71 represents, roughly a 3.5 to 3.7% increase. You can't get any closer than that. And that's my rationale.
Okay, and Mr. Lane seconded. Do you want to speak on it, sir?
You know, I just would,
And-
you know, I agree with Mr. Jar's point. I think this is, in my eyes, the fairest way to set the rate.
Any other discussion? None, we'll put it to a vote. All those in favor of the motion indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Okay, we have set the tax rate with a 1.75 shift.
1.71.
I'm sorry, thank you very much for that correction. 1.71, we need a little room for next year. 1.71, and again, as every member has expressed, we thank your board, Ms. McDonough, Mr. Thornton, for all your work, and particularly the presentation this afternoon, and of course, Mr. Grover as well. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
thank
you.
you, Mr.
Thank you very
Chairman.
much.
Thank you,
guys.
board members.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, bye, good night. All
Good
right.
night now.
So, cemetery deeds is next on our list for approval.
Approve.
Motion made, second, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, unanimous. Number 10 is a request from Colleen Padden and Gillespie Trupino from Lewis's Restaurant and Grill, 92 Central Street. They're submitting a request to continue sidewalk dining through the winter months. We have thus far voted, I think, December 31st. And the governor, did you get a copy of those regulations? What, did you email them to me? The outdoor dining? The state, and correct me if I misstate this, please, Mrs. Mulvihill, we did attend the state ABCC did issue some guidelines, and they did have a virtual conference where they went over some of the details. The state, in my words, is talking out of both sides of their mouth. They're saying that they're encouraging outdoor dining. They know the restaurants are hurting and they're having trouble doing it with the reduced numbers inside. But at the same time, they put such restrictions on the outdoor businesses or things that the businesses might do. For example, tonight they're asking for sidewalk igloos, that they want to purchase some more of those if they could go through the winter months. So we can allow the extended time, and they can buy those igloos, as I'm calling them. I don't know what else they refer to them as. But the ABCC actually requires, if you use those, that at least 50% of the walls be open, in which case there's not much way you're going to sit outside all winter. And if you put heaters inside them, they are now considered indoor dining and has to be formally put as an extension to your premises. And that's the views the ABCC is taking. So I just want to make it clear that while we may want to be helpful and extend the period of time that we're willing to work with and allow some outside dining accommodations, any investment that any of these restaurant owners, including Lewis's, make is at their own risk. They should check into the regulations, and that all we're doing is not blessing any activity other than the fact that we're allowing outside dining. Everything else they have to worry about with their license complying with the ABCC regulations. Mrs. Donahue?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before I knew about that new ABC regulation, my worry is that if we allow outdoor dining now, that the weather might have snow and ice, that if, in any case, that I was thinking that we should require that the person, that the licensee that we gave it to, provide some kind of insurance so that the town of Norwood would not be liable if someone slipped and fell on the ice on the sidewalk. We have to take that into consideration, I think, so in our future plans.
We haven't taken any formal action yet, but I don't know if we have all discussed it, or it's been private discussions between myself and Mr. Mizuko, but some of the thought was, right now, we have allowed the restaurant owners to use the sidewalks. We've put Jersey barriers out so that people can walk around their restaurants, seating, and still get around. That's all started to come down. I think most of it is down now as of today. So that if we extend the date beyond the 31st, we should also, December 31st, we should consider that we have the chairman and the manager work with any licensee who still wants to open to a modified layout. In other words, maybe they're on half the sidewalk, not the whole sidewalk, because we have to have snow removal, we have to have people get by safely. So while we would continue to cooperate with outside dining, not necessarily the same outside dining they've been doing up till today.
So could our board then add the criteria that the person that's using it, the business that's using it, has to provide us with some kind of documentation about accepting the total liability for, for the use of the premises? So the town's not in the chain of liability if someone slips and falls on the snow or ice.
We probably would still be named, but maybe we might have more protection.
Right, that would cover us, I think.
Well, that's going to be up to a majority, but it's a very good point. Mr. Jar?
Yeah, I agree with that point from Mrs. Donahue. I think the insurance is one of the key points. I really don't have a problem with this, because I think, as we have said from day one when we started this last spring, is that each business that wants to have outdoor dining has to present a plan that is acceptable to not just the chair at the time, but to the town manager, because he's the one that has to work with his other departments to make sure that that area, people can still walk. In this case, that snow has to be removed some way, somehow, or that they're not just throwing the snow in the middle of the street. So I trust that, based on the success so far with all of the outdoor dining that we've had this year, that going into next year, if businesses want to take a crack at it and they can present a plan that's acceptable to the manager to ensure that the safety of our own residents in walking in those areas is fine, then so be it. To me, it can be nothing but a success is if the owners are happy and the town is happy that things are being taken care of. Let's go for it.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm fine with Mrs. Donahue's proposal, Mr. Hajar. Just one thing, I see Mr. Tropiano is here, the manager of Lewis's. One recent change has been that no more than 6 people at a table is the capacity. So if you have 3 igloos out there, you're not going to be able to have any more than 18 people. I assume you can only have 1 table inside an igloo. And by the way, it's a well-known fact that there's no such thing as an igloo with 50% of the walls gone. It's not an igloo. It's something else.
Explain that to the ABCC. Would you like to say something? It's not a public hearing, but you're here.
I actually spoke to someone at the ABCC on Friday about that specific reason, or that issue about the 50%, and he is one of the field, I guess you want to call them officers, whatever you want to call them, and he didn't really have any knowledge about any enforcement of any 50% walls have to be open. I explained to them how they work. There's vents on the tops of these igloos. The doors do get opened after a table leaves, sanitized and all that stuff. And he didn't have really any knowledge of enforcement or even that rule of being 50% open, because it kind of defeats the purpose of an igloo.
I would say so, and that was my point. And
Because I mean, they are everywhere.
that statement was made by the executive director of the ABCC, and he himself acknowledged that it was ridiculous as far as it said one thing and did another. But the enforcement's on their part. All my point of making that tonight is, if we extend the license, as I said, all other activities that you might take, such as buying more igloos, the cost and everything is at your own risk. We're not sanctioning anything like that. We're just giving the extended time period.
Okay.
So I'll move that we extend outdoor dining through
Through the COVID,
the COVID
State of emergency.
state of emergency is declared over,
Yeah.
with the provision that
Changes
whoever
the
whoever gets approved also includes insurance requirements that protect the town from a liability perspective.
Second.
which gets to a technical point. That's a broad answer, that's a broad statement. What kind of insurance are we requiring?
According to what the manager wants.
Yeah, we'll work.
Would this be something similar like the insurance that we had to provide for our outdoor dining when we did the summertime and the fall one?
Correct, and we'll work with our insurer to make sure it's acceptable.
Okay,
That's fine.
that works.
Yeah.
Basically, I'm assuming it's just a letter from our insurance company, right?
Correct.
Yeah, and we'd be the name insured, but we're just talking about making sure that with our insurer, that the limits are acceptable and keep the town protected.
Right.
Okay? All in favor?
All right.
Opposed? Unanimous, thank you. So the time has extended through the current orders by the governor in the COVID matter.
Good luck.
Good luck.
Thank you very much.
Joe.
And that, of course, extends, not, even though Lewis has just asked for it, that's a general townwide license holders vote. Correct?
Yes.
All in favor? Unanimous. Mark Good, Town Treasurer. I had documentation from him that I have put away, but basically, we have from the Town Treasurer asking for a request of the board to award a $12,350,000 note, authorizing the borrowing at a very low interest rate. Does anyone have that document?
Yes.
.031, is it?
Yep.
Thank you.
.31.
.031. There is several long disclosures that you have in your packet, a wording of what our motion needs to be formally. If it's acceptable to the board, I'll accept the motion. The language recommended by the town treasurer be inserted in our minutes as read and approved by the
So moved.
board.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous. Thank you. St. Mary Venture Company doing business as Crush Peppers Pizza and Grill at 20 Broadway, submitting an application for common victuals license to operate Crush Peppers Monday through Thursday, 11 a.m. to 9 p.m., and Friday, 11 a.m. to 10 p.m., Saturday, 11 a.m. to 9 p.m., and Sunday, 12 p.m. to 8 p.m. This does not require a public hearing. Sorry?
Yeah,
Could you, Crush Peppers, could you please explain your request?
yeah, I just take that place and I went there. I saw the way they serve the food there, and I'm gonna keep everything as the same as you work here.
Okay, so you'll be a new owner. You're taking over the Crush Peppers?
Yes, me and the other two guys, like two owners, like partners with me.
Is this your first venture, or have you been in similar businesses before?
For me, it's the first business, but for my partners, it's like second business.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions?
Thank you. No, thank you so much.
No question, but I have a comment.
Sure.
I think, just for everybody else, this process works where the process of going through to get certain sign-offs to ensure that the new business coming in is starting off with a clean slate, because if you notice in this one, hadn't seen it for a while, if you look at the electric bill that was paid and the cable bill that was paid, significant amounts before we could get the sign-offs from everybody, that shows that the process works. And I think that's great. I think that should ease everybody, or if they ever have questions about, is everything just 1, 2, 3 and it's done with? No, there is a deliberate process that people have to go through to get these things signed off on and to get past bills paid, and this is a good one to show as an example. So, thanks, Tony. That's good for the department heads who are making sure that we're owed nothing when these new businesses start up.
Okay, is there a motion on the transfer?
Move to approve.
All in favor?
All right.
Opposed? Unanimous. Thank you. Good luck at your venture.
Thank you.
Next item is the Bach funds. We originally were talking about possibly making an announcement of awards tonight, but there's been some new applications that were just received by us, but were found in mailboxes and so forth, so they were timely. And the original applications actually didn't total the same amount of money that we had. So we want to review this whole thing one more time, take another look at it, and perhaps we could table this till next week.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous. Old Grove Della South Norwood Committee submitting a request to place the creche on the lawn of the Morse House at 1265 Washington Street.
Motion to approve.
Second.
All in favor? Opposed? Unanimous. Travis Valley Superintendent of Recreation submitting a request to hold a small holiday parade on Sunday, December 13th, 2020 at 3 p.m., starting at the Cokie Middle School and ending at the Town Common, in partnership with the Norwood Police and Fire Departments.
Motion to approve.
Second.
On the motion?
Yes, Mr.
Do we
Moore.
have any concerns about the governor's guidelines and stepping back to phase one?
No, not with this. These are planned events as outdoor events. This would normally be where we'd have Santa on the common. That portion of the event is not happening, so it's a parade in vehicles, which can be done in a socially distant manner.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and is that a motion to approve? Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous. Next item is roadway sidewalk paving guidelines. I asked to put that on to have some discussion. We've had some on and off discussion in the past of what our policies are and what our standards maybe should be for when we're doing paving jobs. We just went to town meeting and got support for really beefing up that process of getting as much road work as we can done. There was at least one member from the floor brought up questioning something about the uniformity of work as we do it, whether we're doing asphalt, whether we're doing concrete sidewalks, whether we're doing granite curbing or asphalt and so on and so forth, and that on one street may have 2 or 3 different methods being used, and maybe we want some aesthetically pleasing results instead of just matching what's been there in the past. Personally, I think it makes a lot of sense that we have some basic standards. There'll always be some exceptions, conditions that weren't necessarily in some guidelines, and DPW director, the manager have to make a call on just how to do those streets. But I think we should set up some general guidelines as to how we'd like to see them proceeding. Sometimes it may mean you spend a little more money on a street that was going to be, but will end up more pleasantly happy with the aesthetics and the safety of the street and the sidewalks when it's done. So I know the manager and Mr. Ryan and staff will work on this and come back with some recommendations, but I thought I wanted to make sure that there's some buy-in, I guess, to the fact that we should take a look at this, and maybe one board member might sit in on those discussions and give some feedback and see how that whole process is going forward. I thought I'd ask Mrs. Donahue if you're interested, if you would serve and represent the board on that.
That'd be so great, thank you. You know, this is so important because when we installed that island up there on Manhattan Street, that was a question, and neighborhood input is so important, and this would be a good way to do it. Thank you.
Okay, so you work with the manager and Mr. Ryan
Thank
and anyone else he thinks is appropriate, and I'm sure it'll be relatively simple guidelines, but something that we all know ahead of time how we expect things are going to happen. You know, do we do certain things on a main street different than we do a back street? Do we do things different than the way a street already is as far as the type of curving or sidewalks, and why we would vary from what we already have? And once you decide some good policies, even if people aren't happy with them, they're a set of guidelines. It's not
Right.
It's not hodgepodge from street to street. It's a determination that's been made.
Thank you.
So if there's no objections from the board, we'll ask Mr. Mizuko, Mr. Ryan, and Mrs. Donahue to work on bringing some guidelines back to the board. So I guess I'll make that in the form of a motion.
So
Second.
moved.
Anything on the motion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous? Thank you. Next item, Karen Moriarty, Keegan Rowan LLP, submitting a notification of Boston Gas Company doing business National Grid filed a petition with the Department of Public Utilities for the increase in gas distribution rates. DPU has docketed the matter as DPU 20-120 and suspended the effective date of the proposed rate increase until December 1 of 2021. Information file?
Motion to
All
file.
in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous. Town of Westwood Conservation Commission submitting notice of public hearing Wednesday, December 9th, 2020, at 7 p.m. regarding proposed removal of invasive species located at Pond Street, map 28, lots 078 and 079.
Motion to file.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous. Mr. Manager, that brings us to any additional update you have for us this evening.
No, nothing substantial. Just one note on a point Mr. Hajar made earlier about building permits. We normally see a slowdown as we hit this point in December in building permits. We have not yet seen that slowdown in building permit activity, which is a good thing, but also rare. So usually by now it sort of cuts off until later in January, but we're still seeing the same pace. Last year was a record year. This year was as well for home construction. And again, not just small permits where people are replacing just a couple of windows or a door. I mean, the number of large renovations going on at homes throughout town is a historic high. It's been that way for about 18 months.
Okay, very good.
To that point, Mr. Chairman, I may have asked this before, Mr. Manager. Are we staffed up well enough to be able to handle that volume? We're good?
We are. One of the benefits, one of the wise decisions Norwood has always made is we maintain full-time building commissioner, full-time local inspector, and a full-time plumbing and electrical inspector. A lot of towns try to balance part-time staff that you use more in certain times and less in other times. We've always had the four full-time inspectors in the office, which has allowed us to keep up with the permits. And of course, we have Debbie Frangioso, the office staff in there, who's phenomenal as well. So we're well-staffed for our commercial base and to make sure we're keeping up with the permits. It's usually they expect a little bit of a slowdown around the holidays that is not happening as of yet.
That's great.
Okay, if there's nothing else.
I have
got
a
one
question
thing.
for the manager.
Excuse me?
No.
I have a question for the manager.
All right, Mrs. Donahue.
Thank you. Mr. Manager.
Yes,
Have you
ma'am.
heard from the hospital?
In relation to no further updates from the hospital, we are working on trying to come up with a schedule for them to come in and somebody to speak with the board.
So could we please push that forward?
We can.
I think it would be important to have them come right to our whole selectmen's meeting so that the town of Norwood could hear what's going on.
Will do.
Thank you.
Okay, if
So-
anyone has anything additional to add? Mr.
Personal
Maloney, did
agenda?
you?
I did. We personal agendas? Yeah.
Is it time for personal agenda?
Yes.
Okay.
You want to go first?
All righty. It's, thank you. It's actually from Norwood Community Media. Brian Boudreau asked if I could mention to you that there is a live chat with Santa. Call and chat with Santa live only on Norwood Community Media. Phone number 781-762-4082. Live December 10th at 6:30 p.m. And so it's on the Norwood Community Channel, which on broadband 623, on Verizon 2135, on Comcast 8. So it's live December 10th, 6:30 p.m., live chat with Santa. Everyone's welcome.
It's a good booking.
That's it?
Yes.
Thank you. Ms. Maloney?
Just real quickly, Mr. Chairman, in an age of extended, exaggerated, and manufactured heroism, it's appropriate for us to notice the passing of one of the great heroes of the 20th century. Air Force Brigadier General Charles Chuck Yeager passed away yesterday at the age of 97. Yeager came to public notice, though not in a big way, on October 14th, 1947, when he took the Bell X-1 jet aircraft and punched through the sound barrier, the first human being to ever do so. The world at large didn't know much about it for a while. because we were just at the beginning of the Cold War. This was a big secret at the time. But Chuck Yeager broke the sound barrier. Later, as when I remember when we were kids, we did know about him and know about his feat, but he didn't really come to widespread prominence until the publication of Tom Wolfe's book, The Right Stuff, in 1979, and Philip Kaufman's film of the same name, based on that book, 4 years later. Yeager was also noteworthy for being a World War II flying ace, flying a P-51 Mustang. To be an ace, one had to shoot down 5 or more of the enemy. He did that in one afternoon. And so he is, aside from having the second most important flight in the history of flight up until that time, after Kitty Hawk, of course, he was an important link between early flying days, military flying, and later the space program, which eventually put us on the moon just 22 years after he broke the sound barrier. So a life well lived, an adventurous life, a full life, a substantial life, and we thank Brigadier General Chuck Yeager for his service. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Anything else this evening? Otherwise, I'll accept the motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous? Thank you very much.